Well, hello, welcome everybody. I can see that we've got lots of parents here, and I am delighted to be joined today by the parents of Shakeup, obviously, who we were just listening to, and many other amazing young musicians, Kadie and Stuart Kanneh-Mason. Hello, guys.
Hi.
Thank you so much for joining us today. It's a real treat for all our NCO parents, who are all parents of exceptional young musicians, to hear your wisdom and your experience. So I'm going to just do a little screen share so you can talk us through a little bit through your kind of family journey, if you like, and just share a few kind of high points and just tell us a little bit about yourselves. So obviously, hang on a sec, let me just get this. There we go. This is the beautiful picture from the front of your book. There you are, front and center, with the children around you. Do you want to introduce us to the children?
Okay, so you can see Stuart and I in the middle. So if you go to the left, as you're looking at the screen, you see the girl in green with the big afro. That's Konya, and she's now 20. Above her is Brimer, who's now 23. Then there's Aminata going clockwise, who's 15. Mariatu with the cello, who's 11. Isata, who is a pianist, 24. Shakeup, who's now 22. And then going to the bottom is Jennifer, who is a pianist mainly, and she's 18.
Wow. I'm so glad I didn't have to go through those ages because
I got it wrong.
It would have been far less fluid.
I don't know how you managed to look so young. I mean, you look like we could almost mistake you for one of another child in that mix.
Oh. Faces.
So here's a very unfeasibly cute picture. Tell us about this.
That's when they were all very young. I mean, if you look at that, I would have said Easter there was probably 10 or 11. Shake. They used to play a lot when they were young, but obviously, I mean, their Jennifer is barely 3 or 4 actually, and then Konya's probably about 7. So yeah, they used to do lots of games, not just music, but obviously this is a musical picture. So you've got the 5 eldest ones there.
Yeah, lovely. And this.
So this is Britain's Got Talent. This is the semi-final. So this is after they played their medley of pieces, and it was a really fun time. They just had a really good time, and it was really useful for them to learn about cameras and playing and pressure, and so it was very useful. But we didn't take it hugely seriously, but it was great fun.
And it was nice because they wrote the music original music wasn't theirs, but they put together pieces from Swan Lake, I think from Prokofiev's Romeo and Juliet, and I think they even put a bit of a pop song, Clean Bandit, in there as well. So they enjoyed putting that together. So it was great.
Brilliant. And then obviously the young musician, that's been a big part of your lives. Tell us about that.
I remember the yellow cello case. But the bus that Shakeup's standing in front of, it was lovely because Nottingham City Transport named a bus after him and put his picture on the back, and that bus is still going round, not with the picture, but inside you've got a tribute to Shakeup. The bus is called the Stuart KannehMason Bus, and it was just amazing. So the year that he won, we just kept seeing this bus.
And those pictures, they're also interesting because, I mean, Easter got to the keyboard final in 2014. And didn't win that final, and so that was the first sort of lesson in kind of getting to what we thought was the biggest competition ever, BBC Young Musician, and I think, but her not winning actually really helped Shakeup because Easter was able to really coach him through what she'd learned, and she actually accompanied him in the string final and helped him choose repertoire and said, no, you can't choose that piece, that won't work. So it was actually in some ways really helpful for him that she hadn't won actually.
And then 2 years after that, of course, Jennifer was in the piano category final. So they were able to help each other and give each other moral support, which was fantastic.
Amazing. What an amazing story. And of course, another highlight with amazing socks.
The royal wedding, yes. The famous, first of all, the email and then the phone call. The email from the what was it, the house of the Duke and
the palace.
The palace
of William and Harry at the time.
Yes, and then the phone call from Meghan Markle, which led to the wedding. Actually, before the wedding, he did meet them at the venue to talk about music, and he said they were lovely. Actually, he said they were very, very
it was lovely.
Yeah, really lovely and friendly, and and we're really excited to have him play. So for him, it was a really, really great experience, as well as all that's come from playing
And
there.
of course, the socks are from Paul Smith, and Paul Smith is from Nottingham, so they've got a really good relationship. The suit is also Paul Smith,
Yes.
but the socks are the important thing.
I love his socks. They're always brilliant. We always look forward to seeing them. And Hello Magazine, my goodness.
Mm.
Well, of course, this was an incredibly stressful time for me because I had to clean the house and get everything ready, and I was in a complete panic. And there was one room where I just pushed all the junk that we had in the house. And of course, they immediately needed to use that room to hang up all the clothes. And but we just went with it, didn't we?
We just went with it. And luckily, it was also a sunny day, and so they could do quite a bit outside
Yes,
as well.
thank
Yes,
goodness.
that was, thank goodness. So
That was lucky.
we definitely steered them to where we wanted to in the house, actually. As much as possible, because you know what magazines are like.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then the lockdown experience, you had 8 of them at home, didn't you, in lockdown?
Yes, we had an extra child, didn't we?
Yeah, Paulinho there, the top left, the guitarist, and it was. I mean, obviously, it was a very strange time, but I'm so glad they came home a week before lockdown was announced, because we sort of felt it was going to happen.
Well, also we had a major tour cancelled to the Caribbean.
Oh, that's right.
So
we were meant to be going to Antigua. Yes.
We were suddenly not on an aeroplane, so everyone came.
So everyone came home, and it was a really. I mean, the weather helped because it was a glorious summer. We all remember, wasn't it, from March right the way through to August, and then the fact that they were able to do online Facebook streams, I think, helped them, and then I think they were able to work on the album as well. So actually, for them, even though concerts were cancelled and trips to Antigua were cancelled, they actually found it really, really useful time to sort of make music.
But we should say the extra person is Brimer and Shakeu's flatmate, who was also a student at the Royal Academy. So, and he's from Brazil, couldn't get back home, so we just brought him here.
Yeah, the 8th sibling, as he calls himself.
He fits in quite nicely, I have to say. I think he could get being a sibling. Fantastic. And then the proms last summer.
Oh, that was a wonderful time because, of course, we'd had this terrible time when everything was cancelled and there was no music and no concerts, and then suddenly there were the proms, no audience in the Albert Hall, so very different. But they could do chamber music, which you don't normally have at the proms, and it was an incredibly intimate, very emotional concert, and I think it was just meant so much to everybody.
Yes, I mean, they enjoyed it a lot, and Konya, their page turning. She managed to get in on the act.
Yes.
And,
that's a very stressful job.
Well, I think it's the most difficult job, yes, because you're music you've never seen before, right? And,
exactly. You're bound to pull it off or tear it or do something awful.
Yeah.
I just spotted the socks. There's some exceptional socks there as well.
Oh, yes. There has to be the socks.
Excellent. And then, of course, I think last week's news was this.
A wonderful boost. Last year, Shakeup won the Global Award for Best Classical Artist, and then we had the news that all 7 of them had won, and that was incredible. And I think they all felt it was a huge boost to the kind of year that's just happened, and a wonderful sort of, I suppose, hope for the future.
Yes, that's the word I use, hope. Yes, because I think like a lot of particularly young musicians, I think there's that sort of feeling of uncertainty. But I think the awards and some of the nice things that have come out of it, gives everyone hope that there is this future for classical music, and which I think is so important for all of us.
Yes, and I think wonderful that it was a collective award, because I hope it has a collective message.
Yeah, brilliant. And fine. And obviously the book, which I actually have here, and I read and totally couldn't put down, because so can absolutely personally recommend it, which is a lovely sort of biography, I guess, is it? How would you describe it, Kadie?
Yes, I suppose it's biography, isn't it? Because it's about, it starts off being about the children and about how they became musicians and their lives from the beginning. And then I realised it kind of had to be about Stuart and me as well, otherwise, because it was about our parenting. So it made sense to talk about where we came from and why we parented the way we did. So, but the children see it as their book. It's our book.
I were leafing through to see if we'd revealed any secrets about them, and
they were incredibly open. Actually, they just let me write whatever I wanted. They didn't censor me at all.
Brilliant. Well, it is a really good read. I can heartily recommend it. And finally, I'm just going to play this little clip from our webinar last year with Shakeup, about this time last year, when we had Mariatu and Amanasa with us as well. And I'll just share a little tiny bit of this. We're getting some questions from our orchestra members who are sending questions in to ask you. And one of them has asked, is Shakeup annoying?
Yes. Well, he's
no
just,
way.
He's always been the brother who's like, no, he's not annoying. He just teases and he's, always messing around.
Say that again. Sorry,
He's always messing around and stuff. Yeah.
We shouldn't have invited these two into the chat.
Is he the kind of goon of the family, would you say?
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So do you have roles in the family, particularly you two?
Well,
You're the little one.
She's the youngest. I'm just the youngest, so that's my just the youngest. Yeah. And I don't know. I'm just a random middle child. Well, not really middle, just yeah.
I think all middle children can feel for you in that, being the random middle child.
Yeah.
So there we go. Fantastic to see them all in action again. Great. So let me see. We have a first question from one of our parents. How did your children manage to practice in lockdown?
Well, I think actually lockdown, in many ways, became a good sort of. It was really easy for them to practice because normally you'd have, going to school. There's the commute to school. So actually, they found they had sort of more time to practice than they would ordinarily, actually, and so and they were able to support each other through that as well. And actually, a lot of the practice was less solo because they were all around, which they hadn't been recently because many are at university. So they were able to do chamber together. They were able to listen to each other's practice and so on. So yeah,
well, it's interesting. There are two sides to it because normally there are lots and lots of concerts and lots of going to the academy or studying. But suddenly there was nothing, just them practicing together. And in some ways that was wonderful because they were able to really concentrate. But in another way, of course, you're taking away a stimulus. So the drive was gone. So what they did was to do all the Facebook Lives. So they found that having concerts, having to perform and connect actually helped them practice. So that's how they did it.
Fantastic. Can you tell us a little bit about your backgrounds and like music in your families? Because that was for me one of the most fascinating things about the book. You said it was kind of almost an afterthought, but it was brilliant to hear to read about your backgrounds.
Yeah, I mean, I played the piano, and my sister actually did a music degree, and my mother and father both enjoyed music. So my mum played the piano. I think she got to grade 7-ish, and then my dad played the violin as well. So my parents encouraged both of us. I think I started the piano when I was around 6, and then I loved it really from the age of 12. And I also played in a local orchestra. It was Goldsmith Youth Orchestra. Back then, everything was free. The youth orchestra was free. The Ilia gave piano lessons for free. So we were able to do a lot. So there was a lot of music in the family and also in the extended family as well.
And I think what I realised when I started writing the book was just how much parental support matters. Because the reason we both love music was because we always had our parents' support. They gave us the piano lessons and they wanted us to learn music. And that's why we wanted to do the same for our children as well.
Yeah, fantastic. So we've got another question. And when your children were younger, how much did you need to encourage / insist that they practice? And were you practicing with them or did they practice on their own?
Absolutely with them, especially when they're younger. And in fact, we were probably lucky in a way because there were so many children all doing the same thing. Then they never felt lonely. They never felt that they were doing something which was different from everybody else and they were isolated. But what we found that was really important was sitting with them. So we'd sit with them for maybe, half an hour each. But for them, that was their moment when they got attention, they got praise, and they felt special. So I think that was important.
Yeah, I think particularly with young, when they're when I say young, up to 12, 13, I do think that sitting with them and just being in the room with them, because my father was the same and my mother, they used to they'd be in the room, and I think having a parent listening. And then, of course, when they're very young, we're helping them a lot. Is wonderful. And even now, I think when Shakeu's home, he likes to have, somebody in the room. He'll often practice not so much on his own. He'll quite happily have somebody sit and listen to him. So I think that is definitely
yes. And what we did and still do is have the family concerts, so that everyone sits, listens to everybody else, and gives feedback. And I think that interaction still really matters to them.
And they find those concerts the most terrifying of all, actually, playing to each other. But they also enjoy them a lot. Yes.
Yes.
Wow, that's a great way of learning, isn't it? Observing other people as well. You're learning through watching. Brilliant. And actually, a really interesting question: how did your children choose their instruments? Because I know some of them like swapped, didn't they, or gave up on one and went for another. Tell us about that.
On the piano, and often with parents, you sort of start children on instruments that you yourself understand. I think so. I would never say everyone should start on the piano, but because we both played the piano, we understand it. So they all started on the piano, and then.
And also, you can buy one piano.
You can buy one piano, so and then they can rotate on it. So there is a practical one, and there was and then I think it was sort of a string encouragement to say, look, which string instrument would you like, and some went for the violin, but they did swap. Yeah, Shakeu started on the violin and swapped to the.
Well, actually, it was probably I decided that it would be great if they learned violin, so I introduced Isa and Brima to violin. So they were all going to play piano and violin, and then Shakeu was going to be a violinist. But then, of course, he was incredibly naughty on the violin. It just didn't work. And then we went to a concert, he saw the cello, and he chose the cello. And that wasn't actually in our plan at all.
Jennifer did want to, as a second instrument, do the double bass. But actually, then you're thinking about the size of the car. So that was the one instrument where we said no. And then they did try other instruments. I mean, Isa started the oboe, but I think after a month couldn't get a sound, so she stopped that. She did try the harp, which she liked. Shakeu played the trumpet. I think Brima, didn't he do the clarinet? So they did play other instruments, but the main ones were sort of piano and a string. Yes. And
I think you have to choose the instrument that you're happy playing. For us, it was partly economics. We couldn't go too far. We had to. If we did piano and violin and strings, then they could hand down the music, hand down the instruments, hand down the expertise. It was cheaper that way. But also, you can't force a child to play an instrument that doesn't suit them. Just doesn't work. And some children just hear an instrument, don't they? You find children who love the deep sound of the trombone or the cello, and other children who love the sort of shrill of the. I mean, I wanted to play the French horn when I was young, and still to this day, I wish I could have played the French horn. So, and I remember hearing it and just thinking it's the most beautiful instrument ever. So, whereas someone else it would be the flute or the harp. So yes.
Great, fantastic. How many lessons, somebody's asked, do or did your children have in a week when they were growing up?
What we could afford, which was
one lesson a week. Which
on
was
each instrument.
On each instrument, yes, so two. And then that was typically half an hour. But as they got older, that increased to an hour. And by their teens, it was an hour and a half. Well, I'd say sort of 13, 14. Well, I'd say 14, 15, the lessons were about an hour and a half.
On their
first instrument, and then half an hour on their second instrument.
But I remember thinking when they were younger, I wish I could have afforded to give them 3 lessons a week each.
Yes.
But of course,
it's just not
too expensive.
Yes.
Yeah. And another question, do all your children want to be professional musicians?
No, I think that's a mixture. So, I think, yes, obviously Shakeu does, and Isa does, and Brima does, and I would say Jennifer does. So I think there are 4 who definitely do. And Mariatu does, there's 5. And then I think the other 2, one wants to be a writer and one wants to be an actor, wants to go into drama. But I do think all of them will keep music in their life. And I think that's the important thing, isn't it? You never, even if you become whatever, I think having music in your life is just incredible.
Yes.
Yeah. And another question, did any of them ever want to quit?
No, none of them have wanted to stop playing. I mean, I think if you make the decision that you don't want to be a musician, then you scale back on the intensity. But none of them have ever kind of said, no, I don't want to do this. No. There are always times when children say, oh, the practice is hard. But that's human. I think, anything you do, there are times when you think this is so hard, especially if you're preparing for an exam or there's a piece that's, beyond your technical capability and you need to stretch. But no, they've always enjoyed it. I think they love it, actually.
Yeah, I think it's very different to say to a child, you need to keep playing because it's going to give you so much. What you can't say to a child is, you have to be a musician. That's a very different thing. So what we said to them is you have to get grade 8 in both your instruments, then you can choose. And that's actually quite a good way of doing it, because by then that you're so proficient and you love it so much, you don't want to throw it all out of the window.
Great, amazing. Now tell us a little bit about the wider support networks that your children have had coming up, because obviously you've done amazing parenting, but around them there must be teachers and other all sorts of other support, I imagine, thinking of Aisata and Brima and Shaku now kind of embarking on those careers. What have been the useful support networks?
So
yeah, and the list is huge. So firstly, you've got the family support network, which I think is grandparents and aunties. Then you've got schools. I mean, I think, you know, they were lucky, primary and secondary school, to have teachers and head teachers who were supportive of music. Trinity School that they went to, in particular, really encouraged music. And so if they had concerts or local music festivals, it was fine, you go and do that. And then you know, individual teachers, and we've had support. I mean, they've been incredible. We've had moments where, and I haven't mentioned this story before, but there was a time when for Jennifer and Konya, we just said we cannot afford the lessons. And so we contacted the teacher, piano teacher, and said, who teaches at the University of Nottingham, says, we're really sorry, but we can't do this anymore. And we said we're going to take them out, and then we'll keep them going, and then in a couple of years when things get better, we'll bring them out. And she said, you know, she paused and she said to Kadie, I'll teach them for free. And we didn't call her with that aim. We genuinely were going to pull them out. So, you know, there have been other stories like, you know, of that nature. We've
had gifts of instruments. We've had just gifts of just support. Even if someone comes and just says something nice, that is such a boost, because I think it's very hard for parents bringing up children. It's a very difficult thing to do. Music is hard. It's hard work. And I think if just someone comes and says, oh, it was just wonderful hearing those children play, it just keeps you going for another day.
Yes.
So, absolutely.
And there was a woman around the corner who has a grand, and she contacted us and said, look, you know, we know you, at that point, the grand we had was terrible, and no one ever played it. And she said, look, Jennifer can come round, and Konya, I think, can come round to my house whenever they want and practice there. And they did. It's about a mile away. So they used to go around there, practice. So those sorts of things make a big difference. The list
actually really nicely to a question that Nisha has sent in, saying, did you ever feel isolated as parents of musical children, especially if your friends and their other children are doing other activities and other studies?
Yeah, yes and no. I mean, I think it is quite difficult. Especially, I think this brings in the question of diversity as well. If you're bringing children up whose friends are not playing classical music, that can be quite difficult, and you have to sort of battle on and believe in what you're doing. But as Stuart was saying, we were really lucky because the school, even though it was a state city school with mixed children, was very keen on music. So the children didn't feel alien when they went into the school, they felt celebrated. And I think that's very important. And then also they started going to the Junior Royal Academy of Music, so they had a peer group there. And I think there are ways you can stop that sense of isolation.
Yeah, and I think on an individual basis, the children have had moments when they've had to say, I'm not coming to something because I've got to practice for a festival or an exam and so on. So they must have had moments, but they always felt it was what they wanted to do, so that was okay. Yeah.
Great. And just as you mentioned diversity, do you feel that your children are now role models in a sense?
About role models, but I think they definitely feel that they're playing a part, and I think for them that they see themselves as, you know, showing other people that, you know, if you work hard, and if you persevere and if you enjoy things, then, you know, things that you can end up doing something you really, really love. So I think they see themselves more as maybe to help champion a cause rather than say role models.
Yeah, I think they do take that quite seriously, though, because when they grew up, it was actually quite difficult to see other black classical musicians. We'd go to concerts and the audience and on the stage, we very rarely saw another black person in the audience or a black person on stage. And I think we had to work very hard to give the children a sense of role models. So what we did was give them role models in other spheres, so in sport or in film or something like that, and then obviously other role models like Jacqueline Dupre. But
and we also wrote, I mean, I remember writing to Alexis French you know, he's a pianist at Uppingham School, and you know, when I still was very young, and getting her to meet him, and we went and watched him play Rack 3, I think, and so you know, we did take that seriously, you know, in terms of finding them role models. I think all children need that.
Yeah.
And I think from one of the more harrowing things in your book was to read about you experiencing racism in your early childhoods in the UK. Is that something that your children have experienced?
Of course, I think that being black in the UK, black in this world probably, I mean, you're going to experience it, and they take it very seriously. And I think in every walk of life, not just classical music, but classical music, I suppose, is a place where black people are not overrepresented. So, and I don't think the classical world is racist. I think it's just that it's somewhere where within state schools, for example, there is just not enough funding to get people from certain communities to come through into the conservatoires, into the orchestras. So that's something that we'd love to see change. And I think they take that issue of diversity very, very seriously.
Yeah, sure.
Fantastic. Great. So let's come on to the big debate in music education, nature or nurture. How does it play out with your children?
I think there is, it's a really difficult one. I think I'm of the view that, you know, all children are born creative. So that's the first premise. And I think you need to sort of sprinkle, you know, touch points around them, and then they'll pick those up. And some children, you'll find, will be incredibly gifted at music. Some children are incredibly gifted at dance. Some children are incredibly gifted at art or science, or, you know, so I think, and you don't know what that's going to be. So I think there is a nature element that definitely plays a part. But then once the child has found something that sparks their imagination, because I think that has to be the piece, then I think the nurture comes in. And if they want to excel in that, then I think it's definitely nurture.
Yes, I'd say all children are gifted in music, but gifted in different ways. So some may have perfect pitch, some may have an understanding of rhythm, some may love singing, but I think all children can get so much out of music. Now, in terms of whether they're going to be wonderful performers or soloists, those are...
That does vary. And if we look at our children, you know, that varies. Some, you know, will, you know, very fast, you know, they can pick things up and learn a piece, you know, very quickly. You know, others you felt had a much more natural sense of, you know, of the sort of music, you know, and other, you know, so I think, and others were much more collaborative, and others are much more soloist. So I think, you know, I mean, 7 is just a sample, but I think if we took that as a sample, it varies massively in terms of what excites them and what they're more talented in.
But of course, talent is meaningless without nurture. I think a child can be as talented as you like, but you have to encourage that and give them opportunities. Yeah.
Great, fantastic answer. Now there's another question here. Did any of your children ever experience failure or disappointment in their music making, and how did you help them over those hurdles?
I mean, I think all the time, right? I mean, well, I mean, there's learning pieces that you just cannot seem to get to grips with. So there's, you know, from a child, that is failure, right? I cannot learn this piece, through to, you know, entering competitions that you hope to do well in and don't do as well as you would have liked. And so we've had that at all stages, from local festivals through to BBC Young Musician. I mean, you know, I think 5 of our children have entered BBC Young Musician, and one of them has won. You know, the others wanted to do as well, so they've had to learn to deal with that, to see the success of another sibling. So I think it's an important part of life, actually. And I think to shy away from failure, and that, if that's the word that was used, is something I don't think you should do to children. I think children need to experience the highs and the lows, because that's the only way they can learn about themselves.
And also, without failure, there is no success. I mean, you see Shakeu's winning BBC Young Musician. That was the 3rd time he entered. And I think if you don't learn to cope with failure, you cannot be successful, because you learn so much more through failure than you do through success. And I think behind every successful musician, there's a string of things that go wrong.
Yes, and I remember there was a festival in Wales that Shakeup entered, you know, the year before BBC, didn't he? And it was a Gregonog, you know, he played, you know, what he thought was really well, and we thought was really well. and I think a harpist one, and he was devastated. But he came back the next year, and he was sort of almost like a sort
10
of
times
10 times better. And I think that helped him realise that you can be a good cellist, and people can say, oh, you make a lovely sound, but there are other people out there who make just as lovely sounds on their instruments and are just as creative as you are. And so if you want to win, you have to keep trying. And even then you may not win, but at least you think you've given it the best you can.
Great, fantastic. There's a question here about choosing teachers and how long you stick with the same teacher, when how do you know when the time to move is right, that kind of journey.
I think for us it's been a journey. So I think when we first started out in the music, we had no idea about teachers. And I think if I could give one advice is really, really choose your teacher carefully, and talk to people who you know to get advice. I think getting advice about good teachers is a massive, massive one. And then I would say if you've got a teacher who it's not working with, then it's not a reflection on the teacher or your child, but there is a chemistry thing like with any relationship, then I wouldn't persist too long. Yes, I think getting the right teacher is critical, just for their self-confidence. And some children thrive on teachers who are really hard, and and other children just need someone who's a little bit more touchy-feely. And I think we all know our children, and they know themselves. So I think that's a really delicate balance.
And it changes over time. It can be the right teacher for a certain time, and then it's time to move on. But it is a really tricky thing.
Yes. The best teachers are those that I would say who know the time has come. I've got your child to grade 5. Okay, they need to go to someone who can take them to grade 8. I've got them to grade 8. Right, you need somebody else to get them to conservatoire. And we found those are the best teachers, and actually those are the ones that we still have really great relationships with, and even today, actually, that have been the best teachers, I would say.
Fantastic. Another question from Joshua, actually, who's one of our little violinists. Actually, he said, did you ever provide, in inverted commas, constructive criticism when your children practice? So how do you do that? How can you kind of make observations that are perhaps a little bit critical, but frame it in a way that's really supportive and empowering?
Definitely two-pronged. You have to praise what they're doing well, and then and criticize as well. I think there's no point saying to a child, that's wonderful, all the time, because they won't get any better, and you're not telling the truth. Yes. We found the family concerts, that's where they were very useful, because children are very honest with each other.
Yes.
Yes, but also appreciate,
and a bit of humour as well. I mean, sometimes when one of the children plays a wrong note, I'll look at the score and I'll grab it off and I'll say, but I didn't see that Chopin wrote an E flat there. So why did you play a G? And they're sort of, and they know, of course, I'm just being silly, but just creating that sense of humour, and around that.
Yeah, yes. You have to laugh as well.
The only time it's often a battleground with young children, true battleground, is slow practice. Yeah. And I remember a parent at Junior Academy on a Saturday. I think he had a pact with his daughter. She was a flautist, to practice slowly for a whole week. Because they got to, and actually it was the right thing. So the only thing I would say where parents are always right is slow practice. But the rest of it is up for debate.
Amazing. There's a question here from Sophia. When children play 2 instruments, how do they know which is the one for them, the one that they really want to focus on?
It's the one they love the most, and probably the one they find easiest as well. And I think they have to decide that. We had a time with Konya when she was playing piano and violin to the same level, and I actually thought she was probably better on the violin, but she chose piano. It's what she wanted to do.
Yes.
And I think you have to let them choose.
Yeah, I think you should always choose the one you love. I think even if you find you're technically better on the trombone versus the harp, if you love the harp more, do the harp. But
you tend to love the one you can play more easily, actually. That's what usually happens.
Yes. So it shouldn't be the one that you're the highest standard on. It's the one you find easiest and you love the most, I think.
Great. And Jennifer's asked, how do you manage schoolwork? How did you, when they were younger, manage schoolwork, or even now, I guess, alongside all the practice?
Routine and schedule. So we found that, they'd come home from school, they'd have a big amount to eat, nice big meal, they'd do their homework, then they'd do their practice. But you do have to plan.
Yes.
And routine, very important as well. So if they know what's coming next, then it's always very easy to fit things in.
Yeah. Did you have a set, somebody's asked us, did you have a set amount of time that they practiced when they were younger?
Not so much a set amount of time, and you have a rough. I mean, when you're very little, it could be half an hour, and as you get older, it becomes an hour. And it does depend on the instrument. I mean, you can't blow a trumpet, I'd imagine, for 2-3 hours, regardless of how old you are. So I think it varies, and I think making use of weekends, so weekends is, Saturdays and Sundays, if you're not at Saturday schools, is a good time to sort of say, right, you can do your homework, you can get a lot of practice done, and you can also go and play in the park in a whole day, and so there's a lot you can do if you have a schedule and a plan.
And I find a little often is better. So if you practice, I don't know, half an hour every day, that's better than 2 hours every 3 days.
Yes.
For example.
Yes. Because I think that's how the brain works, isn't it, really?
Especially for children.
Yes.
Yeah. We've had a question about specialist music schools and junior academy, and those kind of choices that you obviously, I know Isata went to Purcell for a bit, didn't she? And then you had a big presence at the Junior Royal Academy. When how did you make those choices, and what felt right for you?
We felt that the Saturday school worked the best for us. We did send, Isata really wanted to go to Purcell for 2 years, but the reason I found that very difficult, because it meant sending her away from home. We don't live close enough to a specialist music school that we can send them as day pupils. I think day pupils is probably the best way, but I found that for us, for a family, I found it heartbreaking sending her away, and it meant I couldn't support her the way I wanted to. So after 2 years, she came home and had sixth form here. But Saturday,
I think Saturday school music schools, in our experience, were good, because I think the children were surrounded by children, none of whom went to their existing school, but all of whom had a shared interest, and so they looked forward. I mean, I remember one Saturday it was snowing, and we live on a hill, and the look on their faces at the prospect of not being able to go was, and I'm not quite sure they'd have had the same prospect if they couldn't have gone to school for a day, right? They would have been whoopee. So yes, I think we're advocates of the Saturday schools. I mean, ours went to the academy, but I think the college or Royal Northern are just as good. Guildhall,
Conservatoire.
Birmingham's got a good one as well, hasn't it? As well.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Great. Now, talking about their well-being in terms of their physicality as young musicians, obviously their bodies are taking quite a pounding doing the amount of practice probably that they're doing and playing in ensembles. And how did you take care of their bodies, and did you have any bumps along the way?
When they were little, we tried very hard to make sure they had a balanced life. So lots of sport and fitness and just country walks and all of that was very important. I think being physically fit is really important if you play an instrument.
Yeah, definitely. But that comes with, you can get then sporting injuries. So I mean, Shakeup broke his arm, his wrist in the 2014 BBC. I think, so he. And he was out for 6 weeks. I still remember had a finger, that wasn't sport related, had a finger cramps slammed in a door before a competition. So there have been quite a few injuries related to activities that they've done. And then they have had injuries related to playing instruments. I think at least 4 of them have had injuries. Brymer had quite a long injury on the violin. Jennifer has hand injuries. Shaker's had back. I mean, we had to concert he nearly had to pull out with it, because of his back, and so I mean it is difficult. Like any.
Well, the back was because of being on an aeroplane, but I think with actual playing injuries, what we've learned is you have to be really vigilant. Children shouldn't just if they feel any pain, they should stop. That's the first thing, and you just have to be very, very careful that you are listening to your body and listening to your child's body, because an instrument injury is devastating and can go on a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why it's really important to us at NCO that all that side of the physical and the mental and emotional well-being around being a young musician is so important, because if you don't take enough care of it, it can derail you in an absolutely devastating way when you've invested so much in it, can't it? You can look at losing the thing that means the most to you or the thing that you've invested the most in. Is so important, and that's why our next actually parent webinar in a few weeks, let me see the date, the 13th of June, is going to be with our wellbeing team. Tom Taffender, who does mental wellbeing with us, Sarah Upjohn, who does physical, physio style wellbeing, and Henry Cookie, who does sport and fitness for musicians. So for all of you parents out there, if you've got any questions for them, they'll be on our next webinar. So it just leaves me to say a huge thank you to both of you. I think it's just been a complete pleasure, as always, to talk to you or any of your children. Or it's just such a treat to have your positivity and your energy and you're just lovely, open and generous people. So thank you so much for sharing all that with us. And I'm sure we're all inspired, not only by your children, but also by your parenting, to go back and be more patient with our children's practice. Great. So Kadie and Stuart, thank you so much for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you again at another point in the future.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.